Welcome! Welcome to the CYFS domain. CYFS stands for Children, Youth, and Family Services, and that's what we're all about here at CYFS. Now, CYFS is part of a broader community, the NIEM community, the NIEM being the National Information Exchange Model. Now, the NIEM is concerned with all sorts of information, but here in the CYFS domain, we're concerned with information about children, youth, and family services. There are guidebooks available to give you excruciating detail on the NIEM as a whole, as well as the CYFS domain. And we'll point you towards those guidebooks towards the end of this video. But what we want to give you here is an introduction to the CYFS domain, the main features of the domain, and how those features fit together. So, come on along and let's take a look at the CYFS domain. So let's start with a little bit of history around the CYFS domain. Now, we could go way back into the distant past, but let's just stick with fairly recent history. So fairly recently, we had this thing called the NIEM, the National Information Exchange Model. And the NIEM covered a broad territory. It had a central NIEM, basically called NIEM Core, and that territory had things that were very generic. You had generic sorts of things, basically generic people, generic organizations, generic activities, all sorts of things you can do in that area of the NIEM, but it's all very generic. And then surrounding that were various domains for different communities of interest. And each of these communities has their own territory. So you'll see from the map there that there's justice. Justice has a territory, and inside the justice territory were justice things, justice kinds of people, and justice kinds of organizations, and justice kinds of activities. You also see family services that had family services-oriented things in it. So family-oriented kind of people and family-oriented organizations, activities, and all the rest. You also see an other domain listed, and the other domain really is taking the place of several other NIEM domains. And these are different communities surrounding various things. Emergency management is one. There's several others. And each of these communities has territory containing things specific to their community of interest. Now, off to the lower right, you'll see juvenile justice, and that's the juvenile justice XML data model. And that was a data model designed to meet the needs of the juvenile justice community. So inside of there are juvenile justice-oriented people, organizations, activities, places, things like that. So how did this all get together to form CYFS? Well, you might be tempted to think that juvenile justice really just lived out on its own and had nothing in common with the rest of the NIEM, but that's not true. And in fact, it's not even the case that juvenile justice was somehow congruent to family services. That wasn't the case either. The actual case was that there was a large amount of overlap between the family services domain in the NIEM and the juvenile justice XML data model. So what did we do? Well, we got all those communities together and worked out the overlaps, taking the best of both of those territories and creating one single territory that contained all the goodness from both of the separate ones. And that became CYFS, Children, Youth, and Family Services. So let's start our tour with the people of CYFS. Why people? Well, because they're the most important thing. They're literally the lifeblood of the community. They're the whole reason the community exists. It's in the name. Children, Youth, Family Services. It's all people-oriented. So, predictably, there's lots of people information in CYFS and in the NIEM as a whole. Well, let's start with the NIEM and the kind of generic things you expect to be there. You know, the NIEM has all sorts of person-oriented information. For example, there's name, there's age, there's eye color, there's also height, weight, and sex, but there's actually a whole lot more. So I'm going to show you a list of all the generic people-type information that we have in the NIEM itself. And it's a long list. Luckily, with the magic of video, you can pause it at any time to take a better look. So I'm not going to scroll it really slow because that would be really boring. And if you see something you like, just stop it and take a look. Yeah, I told you, it was a long list. Okay, now, remember the map showing the generic NIEM area and then different domains having their own information in their territory specific to their community of interest. Well, that's what we have with CYFS as well. We have a whole bunch of CYFS-specific types of people-y things, and let's take a look at a list of those. And again, it's scrolling. Feel free to pause it when you see things you like. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of stuff, right? And you might be tempted to think that each of these is just a chunk of information about a person. But that's not really what it is. I mean, at first it's a little overwhelming. There's so many things in the list. But it's important to remember that those things aren't just chunks of information. Some of them are. Some of them are just a string of information, you know, a text string. But a lot of them are actually objects that have more things inside. Let's take a look at a simple one. Let's look at medical status. That's one of the things we added. So medical status actually has things inside of it. It has a medical history text, a psychological history text, and a substance abuse history text. So it's really a container to hold 3 more pieces of information about a person's current medical status. Now it gets more complex. Let's take another look. Let's look at health details. So you've got person's health details, details about their health, and inside of there is really 5 things. Medical health details, mental health details, substance abuse details, medication use, and prescription. But each of those isn't just a chunk of information either. Each of those is a container that has more information inside. Let's take a quick look, and there you see all of them expanded with the types of information in each one of those 5 things. Now, I'm not going to list them all. Let's just focus on prescription in the lower right. Again, it's a video. Pause, take a good look if you need to. But just prescription alone inside has a dispenser who actually dispenses the prescription, the drug itself, the prescriber, so the treatment provider who actually prescribed it, the last taken date, the reason why they're taking this prescription, and then general use instructions. All that information is inside a prescription. And each of the other 4 things inside health details also has additional information inside of it. So now that we've talked about people, let's talk about a related subject, roles. Now both CYFS and the NIEM as a whole have this concept called roles, which are roles people play for a limited time. So they're not actually people themselves, but roles people play. You know, common ones in this world might be the role of a teacher, the role of a police officer, the role of, the role of a juvenile perhaps. These are all roles that are played for a limited time. The role isn't permanent, rather it's a role that you play for a limited time. Now, before I talk more in detail about the juvenile role, I want to clear up one misconception that people outside the community often hold, and that is that juveniles are simply small-sized adults. They're not, and that's why we have specialized roles to represent the things that are special about things like juveniles. But again, they're not just little adults. Let's take a look at a real one. So here we take a look at this fine fellow here, and as you can tell, his fashion sense hasn't changed much since he was a youth, but in addition to being a person, he also has some roles he plays. He plays the role of a juvenile, and he'll play that role from really the moment he's born until he reaches whatever age you stop being a juvenile in whatever jurisdiction that he happens to be living in. So that all depends. But he'll be that juvenile for a limited amount of time. He'll also play another role. He'll play the role of a student. And he'll play that role of student from the time he enters kindergarten until many, 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 many years later, he finally graduates from law school with a GPA he's not going to share at this moment. And again, that's a role. It's played over a limited amount of time. And it's not what he really is. You know, he's not a juvenile as a standalone thing. He's not a student as a standalone thing. These are both roles that he plays while being a person. Now, there are 2 kinds of roles. One is a very simple role where something is just a person with another name. There's no additional role-specific information. But they're not really that interesting. Let's talk about complex roles. These are roles people play that have information of their own, information specific to the role. And a classic one for our domain is, of course, the juvenile role. We have lots and lots of information. I mean, after all, this is the Children, Youth, and Family Services domain. This community of interest is all about dealing with juveniles. So the juvenile role has a lot of stuff. Let's list it all on the screen. Again, pause if you want to take a closer look at any section of it. But these are all types of information that our community captures about juveniles. So all sorts of things about juveniles. Now, there's more roles in the CYFS domain than just the juvenile role. Plenty others. Let's list them here on the screen. And I'm sorry, all the lists of names. We're trying to give you a guided tour and an overview, expose you to the details without really making you look at every single detail. And these are all different roles that people can play in the CYFS domain. And the NIEM itself has a whole nother list of roles that we're not going to show you right now. Now, related to people and related to roles are what are called entities. And entities are simply things that can be either a person or an organization, which is really just a group of people. Some examples, well, here, let's list the CYFS's entities, and you'll see a supervisor in there. And again, if somebody's being supervised, they can be supervised by a single individual, or they can be supervised by an organization. The same with release to detention. You get released to detention. That may mean you're being released to a person, or you may be being released to an organization that provides those detention facilities. So again, that's what entities are. They could be a person, or they could be an organization. And since we're talking about organizations, let's quickly look at the CYFS-specific organizations. Not very many of those, because a lot of the organizations that we would use in the CYFS community were already in the NIEM as just generic NIEM objects. So there's a list of those. Okay, so CYFS has a whole lot of people in it. It's a community full of people. But can we relate those people together? Because that's an important part of our community, the relationships between people. Just random groups of individuals don't tell us much. But when we can relate them to each other, then we can get more information and see what's going on. Now in CYFS, we call these relationships associations. And we use them to connect people together. And CYFS is very, very rich in associations, primarily in family-oriented ones. So we're really able to take groups of people and describe the family relationships between these people. So here's the full list of them, and as you can see, there's quite a lot. We can do a lot with describing family relationships. We also have a handful of non-family associations as well to link people to cases, attorneys, things like that. Now we can also connect people to other things like organizations and activities. And you'll see here there's an employer relationship and there's a school relationship. We'll look at the school relationship in very good detail later on. But right now, just know that we can also link people to organizations and activities. And here's our list of the ways in which we can do that.